Good afternoon. What I'd like to do today is to talk about spinal cord injury as related to paediatrics. I'm Dr. Alison Graham. I'm the clinical lead at the National Spinal Injury Centre at Stoke Mandeville Hospital in Aylesbury, United Kingdom. And in that area, I'm going to talk about the area that I specialise in, which is children and young people. It's far rarer traditionally in children to have cord injury than it is in adults. And within Europe, we talk about 5% of all injuries being those which occur to children and young people. However, while that might be true for traumatic injuries, if you start looking at the non-traumatic injury, there are far more children who are injured or impaired. And it's very difficult to know the true figure. And therefore, it's very difficult to ensure that the models of care and how the services are set up for children actually work throughout each country. At Stoke Mandeville, we have St Francis Ward, which is a paediatric unit at the centre, which was developed for referrals of children for all around the United Kingdom. It's approximately been 15 years running. In order to set up our service, we benchmarked against the CARF standards, which are Commission for Accreditation of Rehab Facilities, and they have paediatric standards for looking after the rehab aspects of children with spinal cord injury. Closer to home, what we've been looking at recently is Pepsci, and that stands for the Pan-European Paediatric Spinal Cord Injury Group. As I say, we benchmarked our development using the service standards, which were North American, but we didn't really have a good clinical network to share the experience of looking after children. So, through conferences and meeting interested people, we brought together a group of people across Europe and beyond to see if we could improve the knowledge and network of those with an interest in spinal cord injury care, as we knew that some people had a little bit of knowledge, other people had lots of experience. The focus of the group was to develop research and clinical priorities for children and parents and caregivers of those with a spinal cord injury which was acquired in childhood. We did not include those with spina bifida, as within the United Kingdom they are managed by a completely separate neuroscience network. So what was the Pepsci study? It was to identify the health and life domain research priorities. Actually developing the survey was a major undertaking in itself. Participants with spinal cord injury of at least 6 months duration were recruited from the English spinal cord injury centres to complete age-specific surveys of health and life research priorities, and these were rated on a 5-point Likert scale. We actually had 47 complete responses to analyse. And as I said before, these results were not primarily just for research, but also to help us develop the service. So what are we expecting within spinal cord injury paediatric services? We must provide lifelong care until transition to the adult services. Our rehabilitation is built on the domains of rehab, which we would use within the Children's Needs Assessment checklist, and I'll give you the link for that at the end. But it also incorporates newly discovered F words in rehab, promoted by CanChild from Canada. For ourselves, we have reviewed our annual programme of review. It's at least a year, but often it's more frequently, to try and encompass the health, growth and developmental needs of the child, primarily based on medical care. Parents and children had been involved, but really just in the physical development of the unit rather than the content of the care that we provided. The public and patient involvement we had used in order to set the unit up. It's been increasingly used in adult services to shape research and service development, and we felt it was now important to find out from children and young people throughout Europe, but primarily here within England, from the families about what the lived experience of using our service and having a spinal cord injury is. We felt it's really important to share the priorities between consumers and providers to get the best long-term results, and also to ensure compliance with the treatments we were asking people to undertake. So for Pepsci, we obtained ethical approval locally. Patients were included if they were aged between 2 and 25 years with paediatric onset spinal cord injury. This could be traumatic or non-traumatic, but they've had to have the impairment or injury for at least 6 months. Patients with severe comorbidities, particularly those with cognitive issues who could not complete the survey, were not included. It was an observational quantitative study, and the UK part of it was part of the much larger European study, which will be published at other dates. So our national survey was consisting of 3 parts. Part 1 was basic information. Part 2, health and life domain questionnaire, and Part 3 is a neurological form. 1 and 2 is completed with the family and the child, or not, depending on their age. And Part 3 was completed by the local healthcare professional. So within Part 1, we have the demographics, the age, the gender origin, the ethnic origin, the date of onset, level, severity, etiology, and educational level obtained. The form had 2 versions of the survey appropriate to the age of the participant. The proxy questionnaire was completed by parents for aged 2 to 17 years and young persons with 18 to 25 years by themselves. Part 2 was the health and life domains. This survey was developed from an adult survey of systematic review of health and life priorities for spinal cord injury. The study recorded information related to importance of the life and health domains. Again, scored against a Likert scale of 1 to 5, where 1 was very unimportant to 5 very important. A lot of time was spent on getting these survey questions together from all around the European groups. And it was also incredibly important to gather the free text so that people could comment freely if the scales or the questions didn't quite fit what was important. So for the health and life domain questionnaire, for those aged 3 to 12, the data was completed with the parent or the caregiver. Children aged 8 to 12 really completed it mainly by themselves with a little bit of prompting. For those aged 13 to 25, it was completely by themselves, and their parents and caregivers recorded a separate questionnaire. The Part 3 was the neurology form, which was developed to collect the spinal cord injury information about the individual's injury, and that was always completed by the healthcare professional. So what did we find? We actually asked 300 people to join, and only 47 completed forms were obtained. Of that group, 28% were male, which is what we would see differently compared to adults, where we have a far more younger women than males. Median age was 13.4 years, and 41.6% were motor complete. 78.7% were within 10 years of onset. 47.7% were traumatic onset, of which 28.1% of those were road traffic collisions. 40.1% were atraumatic, with the majority in that particular group being transverse myelitis as a single group. And unfortunately, there was some that could not be determined. So what did we find? In the parents of the 3 to 12-year-olds, the important research priorities, particularly for health, was to look at the walking ability of their child, followed by spasms and pain. For the life domain, it was overall physical function, then home support services and general health care. For the participants of aged 8 to 12, we didn't get a clear steer in the life domain, in the health domains, but for life domains, we got what happens at school, relationships with others, and how do you feel emotionally, were all the things that they wanted us to do more about. For adolescents and young adults in the 13 to 25 groups, the health domains, spasms, pain, and then pressure ulcers came out, while for life it was access to health care, general physical function, and daily personal needs. What was very interesting is that younger children who were self-reporting were most concerned about schooling, relationships with others, and emotional status, which, while we recognise were incredibly important as part of the rehab, it was not really what we put at the centre We often felt that if we get the healthcare things right, the other aspects, the social and lifestyle stuff would come around it. What we need to do with that is to start looking at planning to change slightly. We've still got to do the healthcare domains, but we've got to look at encouraging play, particularly inclusive play, much more involvement of the school teacher so that the child can be normalised within the classroom, and particularly bringing the other children to understand the needs of those with the spinal cord injury. We also need to look at the role of psychology as the core part of the children's rehabilitation team in order to be there for them at each stage, and particularly the transitions in a younger child's life. We've also, from this, started to look more at third sector support. That's our charitable input. We use the charities such as Backup, which encourage sports and activities and participation. Also Wheelpower, which has been very much involved in getting our young people going on to become Paralympians, but much more important than that is just getting people back into sports at a level that they want to take part in. And we also need to explore the role of the arts for those who don't really want to get involved with sports. The other thing that we have to sort of push forward, although it's not strictly within health, is about accessibility. It's getting to school, it's getting to play, and not just with a child with spinal cord injury, but for their friends and families. For the health domain priorities, particularly those for the adults, caregivers and parents and adolescents, this was very different from a previous adult study. One of the issues that came up with very much was about pain, and one of the things that we have looked at is that we do acknowledge that children with spinal cord injury get pain, but sometimes it's very difficult for them to actually explain. We need to do more work on enabling classification and diagnosis of pain in the younger people. The management of pain does need to change. We need a much broader biopsychosocial model for younger people to reduce the heavy reliance that we see on medication, particularly from acute hospitals, which becomes very, very difficult to wean the child off. We also need to use pain-specific resources for children and young people with spinal cord injury. And we started looking at a website called Happy Maps, which allows us to actually talk to the child in a language that's appropriate for them about what their pain is, how to describe it, and what they themselves have the control over doing. For spasticity, it's similar to pain. We've got to know more about it in order to talk to the children when the age appropriate, reduce the fear of spasm, develop better multidisciplinary assessment, and again reduce the reliance on medication, particularly generalised medications, and if we are going to do something, go far more localised with Botox or even intrathecal baclofen rather than sleeping the child out with large doses of oral baclofen. Pressure ulcers came up as a priority, and that was something that I was not expecting to see. This was something that was discussed with the children and young people, and it didn't really fit in with the clinical review of those that we see in our care. This has made us consider, are we actually seeing all the children with wounds? We think we are, but are they being seen locally? We do have concerns about the use of medical devices in wounds, particularly splinting of the feet, and so that's one of the things that we need to review again. But it does make us wonder, is the fear of wounds disproportionate to the actual incidence? And if so, we maybe need to hold back on how we teach the skin care and maybe not just be so frightening about it, but trying to get the balance right. So next, we need to compare and contrast with the other centres in the study, and particularly our European colleagues. I do feel that most of the concerns can be addressed via health through the current system, but the life domains particularly need integrating with the school and community, homes and housing. And I think the important thing is no matter how well we think we are rehabilitating the child, we need to keep on asking, is this really what the child needs as they go on to be a successful adult? I'd like to thank people who were really involved with the study, particularly Dr. Gillian Taylor and Dr. Bashak Onal. And these are some of the references using CAR for the Commission for Accreditation of Rehab Facilities, Children's Needs Assessment Checklist, which is what we use at Stoke Mandeville, has been written up in the Journal of Spinal Cord Medicine and Can Child, with lots of interesting articles about developmental aspects for children with all forms of disabilities. So thank you very much for your time.